So when I tried psilocybin for the first time, I was in a CVS parking lot, just hanging out in my car after a day of volunteering. I, had made the intention that I was going to stay with a friend. I wasn't going to drive back to Palo Alto to stay at my home, quote unquote. So I remember on the come up, it was kind of dark, maybe like 6 p.m. This is in late fall, if you can imagine that. So the trees, the leaves are becoming shades of orange and brown, and they're about to fall off. They're at that tipping point. And I was just sitting in my car. I had maybe a gram, 2 grams, not really sure. I think maybe two. And it took a while. I just called a friend and just chatted with him. But eventually I said, hey, John Paul, I gotta go. And I hung up because the rain that had started like gently pouring was just like slowly dripping down my window. And I just felt a euphoria wash over me that was indescribable. And, to see these as a tool, as I've processed this experience, it was almost like just getting rid of a cultural operating system that, people didn't want to hang out with me, that people don't love me, that my mom doesn't love me. Things that I knew were not true. In fact, I know a lot of people like me. I know my mom loves me a lot. She sacrificed a lot for me. But it just reset my mind to accept that love.
Welcome to Season 4, Episode 4 of Ouroboros Story Hour, True Tales of Healing in Altered States. I'm your host and producer, Bob Cohen. I'm a dad, writer, teacher, and bluesman. When I'm not driving myself and everyone else nuts, I'm busy writing poetry, singing the blues, and working on a memoir about the blessings of clogged arteries and an unplanned financial catastrophe. Ouroboros Story Hour is an international monthly unscripted storytelling production that presents humans sharing stories about their experiences with healing and visionary plants, psychedelics, and other consciousness hacking practices. Our mission is to promote deep healing and radical acceptance of ourselves and others by sharing and witnessing people's stories. We practice unscripted long-form storytelling. This works best when you're able to set aside some space for it and for you to give your thinking mind a rest and simply just listen with an open heart. And because this is long-form storytelling, we give them the space they need to discover their truths. So kick back, relax, and let the magic unfold. Up next is JamesDavis. He's a community organizer with Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, a Massachusetts group fighting to end the war on drugs. James plans to share a story about how psilocybin helped him accept love from others, work toward his passion, and repair his relationship with his mom. James, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bob. And I was very happy to meet you online because there's very few ways to meet people otherwise nowadays. So I was thankful that we connected through that work that I do for Bay Staters. Just to plug them a little bit, but certainly not the intention of sharing my story. We're a grassroots group in Massachusetts that has members from across the state, and we're working toward the legal decriminalization of psilocybin, ayahuasca, cacti, and ibogaine, because we face a public health crisis in this country of depression, opioid addiction, and trauma. And like my guests that I'm with tonight, I really see these as a critical tool for many people who are at the end of their ropes and just have not benefited from other types of therapy. So I think a good place to start my story of how psilocybin helped me work through trauma is actually to tell you a little bit about where I'm from. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, and I was raised just by my mom. It was just the two of us growing up. I never knew my father, but I had a very loving extended family in Kansas that, provided childcare and helped throughout my life. So I had a very loving family, but it was mainly just me and my mom in that nuclear unit, so to speak. And my mom always really, really struggled financially and spiritually growing up. And I remember one of the first times that sunk into me was when she was being sexually harassed at work as a maintenance worker in a male dominated field. And, she would come home and relay that stress of having, her coworker make derogatory comments about her because she was a woman, because she was in this male dominated space. And, growing up, I felt that secondhand stress quite a bit. There were times when, we were bringing home food from school in the after school lunch bags that they give out to kids who struggle financially. And just to see her resilience and determination to make sure that I grew up with a comfortable life and home inspires me to this day. My mom is my biggest inspiration. That being said, that trauma that she had experienced in two difficult marriages before meeting my father had left a toll on her. Having to work 2 or 3 jobs, raising me, always in these low income jobs where her boss was, in complete control, just a imbalanced relationship in the workplace for sure. Think Subway, nursing, and the like. So that stress rubbed off on me as she, would sometimes say, well, I really wish you could go live with your father. But we didn't know my father. But it was still a convenient scapegoat for her to be able to imagine a world in which, she didn't have to make that sacrifice to raise a kid. And, when I came of age, I'm always very rebellious, as maybe the story with psilocybin will eventually reveal. But I was not the nicest teen. We started getting in a lot of fights when I was coming of age because, I was always a real standout in school. I was a Boy Scout. I went to youth group at my Methodist church. I was always a pretty straight shooting kid, but my mom still always had this sense that I wasn't doing enough. And it was a very palpable feeling that she made a note of never saying she was proud of me because she thought that spoiled people, that it made them, complacent with who they are. So that disappointment spilled over to fights where she would, kick me out of the house, where the fights were just really, really bitter. Someone who I love, who I admire the most, but I also hated the most. And I think a lot of people experience this with their parents and they don't broadcast it to the world. There's always that hate love dynamic, or at least I thought that's how, it was supposed to go, and that's normal. That's not normal for a lot of families. But I feel like some people really, really sometimes hate the people they love the most too. But that was always a really difficult sticking point in my relationships with other people, was that fractured relationship with my mom. So then I went off to college in New York City. I got away from boring Kansas and a bunch of people I didn't really connect with in high school. I was always kind of the loner kid. And I went to Columbia University in New York City, which 1 in 2 kids that go to school there are from the top 10% of income earners. And I was coming from a trailer park in Kansas. So I didn't even realize how gross inequality is in this country until I stepped foot at that daycare for rich kids in a lot of ways. So definitely felt like I was outside the fabric there. Every other kid that had, come from poverty, experienced a much different poverty than I had. They were from a city. A lot of them were Black or Latino, and so they had additional traumas to deal with, but just different cultures and life experiences that made it hard for me to connect to them too. That being said, I ended up bonding with all sorts of diverse people, and I'm really grateful that I got to go to such a nice school that paid my way to go to, because these schools have really generous financial aid for people who can't afford it. For all the harm they perpetuate on the world, I don't want to cleanse them of that. But I remember my sophomore year of college, there was a mass shooting in my hometown in Kansas, and I had been preparing for an economics exam the next day. And our gunman had gone into workplace, disgruntled, and just started shooting people. And a friend had said that, the news report said he had fled to a trailer park on the outskirts of town. There's really only two. There's mine and there's another one. And one of my best friends that was still in high school at the time told me, hey, we saw cop cars right by your house. You should call your mom and see what's happening and how she's doing. So I remember that night just calling, I think at least 50 times, trying to get a hold of her and just sobbing, just worried about what had happened to her. Because I missed her being so far away from home. Turns out she was just at work, working a late shift at Walmart. But because of other traumas I'd had with her as a kid, that was really, really difficult. And that test the next day, I had been very prepared for it, ready to hit it out of the park, but I could barely look at the piece of paper. So I decided I would go see one of the school therapists and see, for more or less the first time if therapy was going to help. It didn't. I think some people find therapists they love and are really helpful. And then sometimes I got this guy who told me to keep a calendar, and that was his answer to this traumatic experience I'd had, was to keep a calendar. So it kind of shed light on how the healthcare system wasn't helping me fundamentally reconnect with my mom or understand how to heal that relationship. Skip a few years. I'm graduating from college. I don't have a job lined up, but I have a few grad school options in mind. Like you, Haya, I'm a master's student. I'm almost done finally. And I'm at USC in a remote program. It was remote before the pandemic happened. Very lucky to not have to transition like your students, Bob. So when I graduated, I was just lost. I was in love with a girl I'd been dating in New York. So I just decided I hated Kansas. I couldn't find a job in Kansas. So I just moved there, and I'd stay with her, stay with friends, kind of couch surf in New York City as I tried to find a job and escape the boredom of Kansas. And then also the conflict with my mom that would reemerge after just a few weeks of staying with her, right? So every time I see her, there's a honeymoon period where everything's going great. But then, old habits start to sink in, old blame games, and just like anger that's not even based on anything that's happening. It's just based in the past. So, trying to kind of get away from home, escape from home, is a big theme in my story, and eventually how psilocybin helped me. I finally got a job at Stanford that fall after some rough living in New York City, and just trying to find a job. And this was for a poverty center, a center that does research on poverty at Stanford University. And it was ironic because the way that these people talked about poverty it was just so clear that they had grown up very, very comfy. And uh, when they were planning a study of like 5,000 Americans and were going to send people my age out, recent college graduates, to survey people in poverty. And I was part of the operations team planning that, but they really didn't account for the fact that a lot of the people they'd be hiring wouldn't be able to afford housing, at least not easily, without most of their stipend going just to pay to put a roof over their heads. So uh, the irony of that was that in order to afford this job at Stanford, I was also uh, couch surfing with some really good friends of mine who are doing their PhD there. And to hear my boss say, you know, we're not worried about them finding housing, they'll figure it out, just really disgusted me, because here they are, the experts on poverty, and they happen to know absolutely nothing about it except this highbrow statistic view of how it works. So didn't fit in with that job. I kept driving up to Berkeley, which is a way cooler place than Palo Alto, in my opinion. I'm sure a lot of people in the psychedelic movement would agree with me, but I started volunteering for an animal rights organization in the Bay and just doing activism. Like you, Haya, I started work on a documentary with a Stanford student. And it's a 4-minute biopsy of a good friend of mine named Susanna, who's an undocumented immigrant who worked in a slaughterhouse, experienced all the horrible trauma of having to kill animals, but now dedicates her life to activism and using activism as a way to heal through that trauma. That was exciting. But to get to psilocybin, by the way, Bob, I really appreciate these stories are freeform, because you can see my flow of consciousness just really messing up. So when I went up to Berkeley, I had these great friends that were letting me just crash at their place rather than having to drive down to Palo Alto at the time to stay with my PhD friends. So I spent some nights just like sleeping in my car, just because I didn't want to get an apartment while I'm also like at a job that I hate that's also temporary, like to take out a year-end lease and not just stay with friends and then like drive up to Berkeley and have a fun time and sleep in the car once in a while. It seems silly. And so housing insecurity was a defining feature of graduating college, even from this Ivy League fancy schmancy school. But when I was in Berkeley, a friend got me psilocybin mushrooms, which I'd never tried before. I'd had LSD with a friend while I was back in Kansas, and it was very just recreational. And maybe I didn't go into it with intention. We were just kind of walking around outside on a beautiful day. And trees are always the most striking experience of a psychedelic trip, in my opinion, just feeling their energy and knowing how much more important they are than us in a way, and that they give life. And in many ways, our consumerism and consumption takes life away from others and the earth if we're not giving back. So when I tried psilocybin for the first time, I was in a CVS parking lot, just hanging out in my car after a day of volunteering. I had made the intention that I was going to stay with a friend. I wasn't going to drive back to Palo Alto to stay at my home, quote unquote. So I remember on the come up, it was kind of dark, maybe like 6 p.m. This is in late fall, if you can imagine that. So the trees, the leaves are becoming shades of orange and brown, and they're about to fall off. They're at that tipping point. And I was just sitting in my car. I had maybe a gram, 2 grams, not really sure. I think maybe 2. And it took a while. I just called a friend and just chatted with him. But eventually I said, hey, John Paul, I gotta go. And I hung up because the rain that had started like gently pouring was just like slowly dripping down my window. And I just felt a euphoria wash over me that was indescribable. And, to see these as a tool as I've processed this experience, it was almost like just getting rid of a cultural operating system that, people didn't want to hang out with me, that people don't love me, that my mom doesn't love me. Things that I knew were not true. In fact, I know a lot of people like me. I know my mom loves me a lot. She sacrificed a lot for me. But it just reset my mind to accept that love, to like see that other people do care about me. I just often turn it away because I don't think I deserve it. And that experience, I think, was facilitated by a walk I did. So eventually I got out of my car in the CVS parking lot and I just started walking down downtown Berkeley. Uh, People had put up Christmas lights prematurely, so those were very pretty. And I just noticed a lot of happy people out and about. And I was able to kind of draw from their energy and realize, like, hey, that couple spending time with each other because, there's love and there's affection there. And when people spend time with me, I need to accept that affection too, instead of just thinking that it's purely transactional on their part. And to put this into action, when I got back to my car, I finally texted my friend because we'd planned to hang out. And I said, hey, I'd really like to come over now because I miss you guys. And it sounded way too forward. It's just a friend who I'd known for a couple months, but I was like, I got to come over now. I really want to hang out with you all. And he was like, heck yeah, you can come over now. We're gonna get some vegan pizza. So Lo and Walkie Talkie, that's what he goes by. He's from Ukraine originally. They shot me the address again because I'd forgotten it, and I just walked over there. And I told them, I'm like, by the way, I had some shrooms, so it's the first time I've ever done them. And they were excited to just trip sit me and make it a great experience. So Walkie Talkie put on this very, very beautiful nature sequence on the TV that's just like from drone footage, showing just miraculous mountains and forests and trees. And, he put on Terrence McKenna in the background, someone who I was not familiar with at the time, who in his crispy, grungy voice that I love, was just narrating these trees and then these ancient indigenous monuments that were being captured with drone footage. And I think we did that for about an hour with laser lights, and it was just very surreal to think through, like, and feel my mind kind of open up to new possibilities. But that big possibility being that, look, I was vulnerable to my friends and I said, hey, I love you. I want to hang out with you. Didn't say I love them, but a gesture of love. And that I could finally kind of accept that reciprocally without hesitation. And I guess that's the recovery story, is that it just gave me a new paradigm to think that people do like me. Something I just convinced myself was never true. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to relate to Bob's story because I thought he said something really, really meaningful to me about trees. So on this Berkeley trip, one of the first I'd ever done, there's also these trees on Berkeley's campus that literally look like this. I should look up the name, but it's almost like the campus was designed for people on acid or on shrooms. And they have this giant obelisk in the middle of campus. And I just remember laying with Walkie Talkie and another friend named Ali from India. And we just laid upside down on the bench and just looked at the sky and those trees. And it was surreal. I've had trips where I was like very much like eyes closed, like seeing lots of different shapes and different experiences. I've never done really high doses, admittedly, but just the reality, like how real that felt looking at those trees was incredible. And I think they really speak to me too. So to tie this back to activism and why I feel like activism is a mind hack for me. I recently trip sit for my girlfriend here, my partner here, and she had never done it before, so she just wanted to take a tiny little bit, see how it feels. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take some. No, no biggie. I'll take 2 grams. I can trip sit and take that much. Um, she had a great time. I started thinking about how the rate of Amazon destruction is higher now than it has ever been before, as companies that need to graze their cattle and cut down trees so they can grow soy for cows um, have killed indigenous activists and just continue to set one of the most precious places on our planet on fire. And this is happening all over the United States as well. Um, so here in Massachusetts, I currently work for a state legislator, a really cool guy, and I'm just learning the ropes of politics. And I wanted to work on decriminalization and ending the war on drugs because it's always been a big bugaboo of mine. My cousin in Ohio really struggled with heroin addiction, methamphetamine addiction, and it you know, forever hurt his relationship with his daughters for sure. And he's still just in the throes of it, incarceration, rehab that doesn't work almost by design. And yeah, I really hope that someday I can help him get a hold of ibogaine, but I also don't want to go to jail. So I don't know how to help Jason, but I want to. And I got to think that there's Jasons down the block from me, right? There's lots of people in my neighborhood in Somerville where I'm living now that need that help too. And luckily, the pandemic has almost flattened the world for activists, and I've just reached out to people, met with them, and said, hey, um, why do you care about psychedelics? Why do you care about ending the war on drugs? Just get to know people. And, we're, maybe I shouldn't say this, tonight we were supposed to decriminalize in Somerville, Massachusetts. And we chose not to because we want to make it more inclusive, our solution, not because we couldn't have, but because we wanted more time to really make sure we got the law right. Thanks, Bob. And so that's why activism has helped me, because I can think of people in my life like my mom or Jason or Susanna, the slaughterhouse worker friend, who we can do so much to help people who are down the block and people who are here, that remind us of people we love. And that's helped me repair my relationship with my mom, I'd say, just because when you give love, it's easy to realize the love that other people have shown you.